welcome to the Jobcast. I hope 2021 is off to a good start for you. We're just going to jump right in. I'm excited to introduce our speakers today. Daniel Culbertson is an economist at the Indeed Hiring Lab with a focus on the U.S. labor market. Daniel previously specialized in regional analysis and forecasting as an economist with Moody's Analytics and holds a master's degree in economics. And Taylor is a recruitment evangelist at Indeed, where he consults with national employers, helping them improve recruitment strategies through data, insights, and trends. And that's me, Brandy Warwis. I'm on Indeed's Job Seeker Experience team. We're responsible for creating helpful resources and events like this Jobcast for our users, like you. To get us started, I'll pass it over to our economist, Daniel.
Thank you, Brandy. And hello, everyone. Thanks for tuning in today, and thanks for allowing me to be here to speak with you all today. So to get started, let's talk a little bit and very quickly about 2020, because I'm sure everyone's heard enough about it. But obviously, 2020 was a bit of an unusual and surprising year economically, and surprising for all the wrong ways. We saw untold devastation in the labor market due to the COVID-19 crisis. And then for the majority of the second half of the year, the labor market was slowly bouncing back. We saw the economy continue to add jobs for about 7 months towards the second half of the year, and the unemployment rate slowly continued to fall as the economy slowly began to reopen a bit in the second half of 2020. And then just last week, the Bureau of Labor Statistics released their last jobs report covering the final month of 2020. And unfortunately, it was a bit of a down report. In the report, overall, the economy lost 140,000 jobs, which was the first time in 8 months that had happened. So as far as from the perspective of overall employment growth, we saw a bit of a backtrack there. And the unemployment rate did not change, and it stayed elevated where it is today at 6.7%, which is obviously much lower than where it was at the beginning of the year, but that is much higher than it was before the COVID-19 crisis started. So we still have a bit of a ways to go. And to get a jobs report like we did at the end of the year, heading into the winter season amid rising COVID cases, was a little bit concerning. So the labor market at the moment is on so much shaky ground, but we'll see how that plays out as we continue to move through the winter. We've also been tracking the economy in Indeed's job posting data. This is something that the Hiring Lab, the team that I work on, follows quite closely. And as a job postings aggregator, Indeed pulls job postings from all across the internet. We scrape the internet, and then anything that looks like a job posting, it ends up on our site. So this is a look at the online labor market at large, and not necessarily just a look at which company, how many companies are spending money to sponsor jobs with Indeed or anything like that. This is a look at the labor market at large. And the way that we're showing this data on this chart is we're looking at the overall trend in job postings on Indeed's site for the years 2019 and for the year 2020. And so obviously you can see the difference there. In 2020, as soon as COVID-19 became a problem, we saw job postings drastically fall on our site. This was to be expected. Pretty much at the first signs of economic turmoil, one of the first things that employers will do will be pull back on hiring because they don't want to be making any kind of long-term decisions in the face of economic turmoil. So at the end of March, job postings began to fall on our site drastically, and they continued to fall through the beginning of May. At the labor market bottom, at its worst point, on our site, job postings were about 40% behind last year's trend, and that was at the beginning of May. Since then, throughout the second half of 2020, we slowly saw job postings increase on our site, again, slowly, but rather consistently. And as of December 31st, so at the end of the year in 2020, job postings on our site were about 10% behind last year's trend. So the main takeaway there is obviously major changes in the labor market due to COVID-19, but we've seen slow improvement over the year, and we still have a little bit of ways to go. One of the other trends that we've been monitoring very closely is something that's on the job seeker side of the data that we have on our site. And this is a job seeker trend we've been keeping a close eye on, and that is job seekers' interest in remote work. So what this chart is showing is this is the number of searches on Indeed's site that have keywords related to working from home. So anything like remote work, telework, commuting. And it's showing this as a share of all searches on our site. And so before the COVID-19 crisis, work from home or remote work related searches only accounted for about 1 or 1.5% of job search on our site. And as you might expect, this figure surged in mid-March when COVID-19 became a problem. There was a little bit of a lull there during the summer, but throughout the second half of 2020, this chart is going through December 6th. So towards the end of the year, job seekers were increasingly interested in working remotely. And looking at this chart, 4% or 3.5% of all job searches on Indeed might not seem like a very high number, but when you think about how as job seekers, we can go on Indeed's site and we can type in pretty much anything we want to into that what box. So there's a lot of possibilities there. So for searches related to remote work, taking up, whatever it is, 2.5%, 3%, 4% of that job search number just shows how interested job seekers are in remote work opportunities, given the state of the labor market today. And my colleague Taylor Meadows has some advice and things to keep in mind when searching for remote work on Indeed.
Yeah, hi everyone. Thank you for having me. I've been able to work with Daniel on numerous accounts at Indeed with a multitude of different clients. And we certainly understand the magnitude of what a lot of you might be going through right now. But what I do want to say about that is rest assured knowing that our engineering teams, everyone at Indeed is hard at work to make sure that we're innovating on your behalf right now to make it as easy as possible for you to find jobs, especially in this turbulent time that we're living in. So what I wanted to just quickly share with you is something that we did in the last year to meet all of these challenges. One of them is the ability to search directly for remote work. Historically, we would always have any sort of an employer post a job, identify the city that location or that role is specific to location-wise. But now we've embedded features in for you to be able to search for remote positions. So a couple different ways that you can do this. You can either type in the word remote into the what field and then leave the where position blank, and that's going to present to you all remote positions on Indeed in totality. Another way to approach this is if you do have a specific title in mind that you want to search for and keep your criteria measured in that way, you can go ahead and enter in the title of what you're interested in looking for in the what field, and then in the where field, enter in the word remote, and then that will also populate all positions that are able to be worked at from home and are classified as remote. Or you could combine the two different approaches and simply input the word remote and then the name of the title in the what field, and then that will work as well. If you're kind of unsure exactly where to start and you want to just begin with a wide net of a search, you can go ahead and actually input the exact same criteria as you typically would in a search. And then there are going to be different filters that appear for you, namely the remote field that populates inside of the search. So if you have any additional questions about this, in the way in which you can search for jobs, definitely let us know. But do know that filter is going to be permanently embedded there for you to make search easier.
Thank you, Taylor. And I showed that the trend in job postings on Indeed's site in an earlier chart, and there's many different ways that we can look at that data to try to track changes in the labor market. And one of the ways that we've been doing very closely this year is to take a look at job postings on our site broken out by sector or industry. And this can give us a sense of which industries are holding up well during the pandemic and which ones are taking the brunt of the impact of COVID-19. So what we see here on this table is a look at our job postings data broken out by industry or sector. And what we're doing here in this middle column is we are taking a look at the job postings on our site in these different sectors or industries as of December 31st and comparing that to the same point the year prior. So just to get a sense of how these industries are holding up and how they're faring compared to the same point last year. And so what we see here on the bottom of this table, these are industries that have been most impacted from COVID-19. And these are largely the industries that you would expect. So for example, hospitality and tourism, compared to the same point last year, job postings in hospitality and tourism are down about 47% on our site. And so as we know, travel has been greatly impacted by COVID-19, as have anything related to arts and entertainment, anything that requires people gathering in the crowds. But we also see childcare and food preparation service as some of our sectors that have taken the biggest hit and are in the biggest hole from COVID-19. In the middle of the chart, we have some of the sectors that have held up somewhat well. They're more or less performing in line with the rest of the overall labor market. And these are very different fields, ranging from customer service to physicians and surgeons to sales, beauty and wellness. And then here at the top of the chart, we have some of the industries that have been holding up rather well. And these industries, when you're making a comparison to last year, they're actually ahead of last year's trend. So things like loading and stocking and construction, anything that has to do with the moving around and production of goods is doing rather well. And that's something I'll cover here more in a bit, but also pharmacy and retail. So the main takeaway here is that there are different industries and sectors that have held up relatively well during COVID-19. And those are rather few and far between, but there are sectors that have done okay throughout COVID-19. And there's obviously ones that have been pretty greatly impacted. And I think the takeaway there for job seekers is that there's different pockets of opportunity in the labor market always, but during COVID-19, that is going to look a bit different. And this next table has sort of a categorization that we've been using this year to sort of put these industries in different buckets of which ones are holding up well and which ones aren't. And so starting all the way at the left, we call these our winning sectors, but winning here is a pretty relative term. They're doing okay, they're doing pretty well, but during COVID-19 crisis, everyone's impacted, right? So these are the industries that are holding up better than others. And a lot of these are industries that have to do with production of goods and moving goods around. So things like warehousing and driving, think delivery drivers have held up pretty well. We have some of our sectors that have been rebounding throughout 2020 and into 2021 as certain pockets of our economy slowly begin to reopen to some degree. Things like restaurants, clothing stores, other services like hair salons, and even dental offices have been bouncing back pretty well. We also have our damaged industries. These are the ones that aren't likely to bounce back in any meaningful way until we get some type of control over COVID-19. So anything related to travel and tourism, hospitality and leisure, arts and entertainment, we're just going to need to get a handle on COVID-19 before these industries can really start to bounce back. And then this last section, these are our paused sectors. So if you think about the industries that took the brunt and the immediate impact of COVID-19, that was a lot of service industry workers and a lot of things related to the service industries in general. These paused sectors are mostly things like tech, finance, professional services, corporate roles that weren't directly impacted at the beginning of COVID-19, but they still sort of are on pause as many companies are pushing hiring decisions in these roles until there's a bit more economic certainty. So even though these roles still weren't greatly and immediately impacted by COVID-19, these are the type of sectors that are still down compared to the previous year because employers are just waiting to make decisions on these types of roles until we have a better idea of what is happening economically and what's going to be happening in the near future.
Yes, on that note, what we just want to really reiterate here is that, there are ways to navigate this. And, everything is temporary. So we are, anticipating, brighter days. But I think for right now, something to focus on is really just this idea of resetting expectations for yourself. So, if you are in a position of, maybe being between jobs right now, or, maybe you are needing to focus on, career trajectory and where you want to take yourself, right? Know this, even if you were to take a position right now that you don't want for the rest of your life, but it is going to be a temporary bridge for you, right? To either just earn income, earn new skill sets and, have new experiences to put on your resume, that's okay. Know that, right? Again, it's not permanent, but if it is something that is going to carry you to potentially a role that you do want to invest more time and energy in, try to look at it that way. Contract, temporary work. These are great resume builders that allow you new skill sets, and you write new contacts even in your network. So don't look at it as a end all be all, right? This is just something that can carry you forward. And then if you're at an organization right now that does allow some sort of movement, or if there is some sort of flexibility, maybe look to see, what that would look like inside of your own organization, so that you still have, right, your parent company to roll up to, you still have benefits and things like that. But maybe it's just a new opportunity, again, for you to meet new people and earn some additional skill sets during this time.
And I'd like to highlight two more trends that we've been tracking in Indeed's data this year. And they, again, both relate to what we're seeing in Indeed's job postings. And so what we're doing here on this chart is we're taking that timeline of the year 2020 in our job postings data, and we're segmenting those job postings out by what we call wage tier, or just how much those jobs pay. And the way we're displaying this information on the chart is that we're making a comparison between the year 2020 and the year before, 2019. And so since 2020 was such a worse year for jobs postings, that's why everything on this chart goes negative. So what you see here in the beginning of the year is that's the impact of COVID-19. That's the immediate drop in job postings that we saw. And then on the right side of the chart, we're seeing these different groups of job postings bounce back. And we segmented this out by wage tier so we can get a sense of what types of jobs are bouncing back quickest and which types of jobs had the biggest impact. So if you look at this, so job postings that were in the bottom third or the middle third of the wage tier, job postings that are jobs that tend to pay less, you can see here that on the left side of the chart that they faced a larger impact from COVID-19. Those job postings bounced back, or those job postings fell further. But there were also the types of job postings that began to come back on the site and bounce back a bit more strongly. So think things related to the service industry, food prep and service, retail, all other types of services. These are the jobs that do tend to pay a bit lower, but these are the jobs that began to bounce back rather quickly when the economy began to bounce back. And getting closer towards the end of the year, still that bottom third of job postings that are on that wage tier that do tend to pay a bit less, they've been faring better throughout the second half of the year. They're still negative. They're still below where they were last year, but they're doing much better than the upper wage tiers. So it just gives you a sense of some of the key differences that you see in the labor market when you begin to break things out by the wages that these roles play. And then the last trend I wanted to highlight in our own data has to do with geography. So if we take that same job postings data and we split those job postings out by the size of the city or the size of the metro area that they're in, you can see some key differences here as well. So what we're doing is very similar to what was on the last chart. We're making a comparison between 2020 and 2019. And this is all segmented out by the size of the metro area. So what you can see on this is that throughout the COVID-19 crisis, larger, more populated metro areas have faced bigger impacts. And that's true in our job postings data as well. As you can see from that dark blue and this sort of purplish, what is that, a fuchsia, purplish colored line. Larger metro areas took the brunt of COVID-19. Smaller, more rural or more suburban metro areas, or cities or towns, I should say, their job postings didn't fall nearly as far, and they've bounced back quicker. And actually, if you look at small metro areas, so very suburban or even rural areas, their job postings are actually ahead of last year's trend. So again, what this chart is useful for is just highlighting those differences that we see across the economy when it comes to job postings on our site, whether that's by the wages that these jobs pay, or that's the size of the metro area that these jobs are in.
Yeah, so if your industry is just heavily impacted by shutdowns right now, you may not be targeted or cornered into a specific location. So what I would love to be able to have you do is just expand your search parameters out. So essentially, now that so many positions are remote and a lot of positions have been converted to a work from home status, It's highly likely that infinitely more opportunities are available now than they were available before. If you are somebody who has historically lived in a larger metro area, but you're wanting to make a move, either for for financial reasons, or if you're just looking to switch up your geography, now would actually be a good time for that because of the expansion of remote roles. I can share with you from a personal standpoint, I've got a number of friends in New York City who have left the island and made their way out to Jersey or to Long Island to have more space. And before, they were kind of constricted to having to be close to an office, to where now a lot of those roles have shifted to remote status, and so they've been able to relocate themselves for their own well-being. So if that's something that has been interesting for you in the past, now would actually be a better time to consider that.
Thank you, Taylor. So I want to talk briefly about what we should expect in 2021. And before I even start this, I want to throw out the caveat that I don't have any forecast for you. That's not something we do here at the Hiring Lab. And I certainly don't have all the answers. I wish I did, but I do not. But there are a couple points that I think are worth highlighting when it comes to what we can expect from the economy and the labor market in 2021. So the first one has to do with containment of COVID-19. So this is something that economists have been saying since the start of COVID-19, and it's no less true today. Our economic recovery and our ability to get the economy back to where it was before COVID-19 is very closely tied to the path of the virus. It's very closely tied to COVID-19. Until we get some type of handle on COVID-19, which with the news of the vaccines that we had at the end of last year and the ongoing rollouts, it looks like the handle that we're going to get on COVID-19 is through vaccination. And thankfully that's relatively soon. But until we have that, and until people are comfortable enough going back to their normal economic lives that they had before COVID-19, and that includes businesses, business owners, consumers, and workers, until people are comfortable enough going back to their normal economic lives, we're not going to have a full or a very robust recovery. So first and foremost, that's very important to keep in mind, is that the economy is very, very closely tied to the virus. But there are a couple things that we can keep in mind. And so as we begin to see people get comfortable and go back to their normal economic lives, there are some job sectors that may rebound rather quickly. So think about the sectors that were most impacted by COVID-19. They suffered the biggest hit, everything related to services, retail, restaurant workers. Those started to rebound somewhat strongly over the summer as we began to reopen, but taken hits recently as we've gone into the winter and COVID-19 cases are rising. But once we get a handle on the virus and things are starting to reopen and the economic engines are starting to wind up, I would expect that those service industries are likely to bounce back rather strongly. Some of those paused sectors that I mentioned earlier, so things related to corporate jobs and tech, those might take a bit. They probably won't bounce back as quickly as some of those other service industries. But as businesses are more confident in the recovery, and as the picture of what's going to be happening economically over the next couple of years becomes a bit more clear, you can expect things to pick up in those sectors as well. And then damaged sectors, things like travel and tourism, arts and entertainment, those will come back as well, but those are very likely to come back a bit slower. And part of that reason is, it's probably going to take a lot for people to get comfortable traveling enough again. But even once people are comfortable enough, these are industries that at this point will probably have been dormant for almost a year, and they've been operating in a much less capacity. So it could take a little bit of time for these industries to really ramp back up and get those assets redeployed, get workers rehired, and things like that. So there are some aspects of the economy that might bounce back a little quickly, but there are other parts of the economy that might take a moment. Another important part of 2021 is how politics and policy really play into this. And the first bullet point here is emergency relief spending. So we have seen the federal government step in numerous times over the past year to provide support to businesses and consumers and workers. to try to help get things moving throughout the COVID-19 crisis. And they've most recently done so at the end of December with the passing of that $900 billion stimulus bill. Most economists will tell you now that, it's a great thing that that stimulus was passed at the end of December. But most economists will tell you it's likely that we're going to need more. The Federal Reserve chairman, the chairman of the Federal Reserve, Jerome Powell, has come out publicly numerous times over the past couple of months, declaring that we need more fiscal stimulus to get things going again. So how effective that last bit of fiscal stimulus is ultimately going to be remains to be seen. And it also remains to be seen whether or not we are going to be getting more throughout 2021. But that is something that is going to have a big impact on the overall recovery. The impacts of a new administration, I won't say much on this, partly because there are so many things in so many aspects of a modern economy that really determine how an economy operates. And some of those have to do with who's in the White House, who's sitting in Congress, but most don't. So, while political changes can have an impact on the economy, I think the change is probably much less than people anticipate. And also that change that comes from who's sitting in the White House or who's sitting in Congress is very difficult to disentangle from all the other aspects of what determines how an economy operates or how well an economy operates. That said, with the new administration coming in next week, and with the changes that we've seen in who controls Congress, it does make it seem a bit more likely that we will get economic stimulus in 2021 or more fiscal stimulus. So that impact also really it remains to be seen, but that's something we'll just have to see how that plays out in 2021. And lastly, I wanted to comment really quickly on the permanence of some of these shifts that we've seen in 2020. So we obviously saw a lot of changes this year. And so one of the major changes that we saw in 2020 was people shifting their spending from services to goods. So since people can no longer go out and spend money at restaurants, and at the movies and at music concerts and things like that, and on other services, most spending shifted over to ordering things from online, home improvement projects, things of that nature. And that's why we've seen the jet sectors, driving, warehousing, transportation do so well this year, because everything shifted to the production or the moving around of goods. This is important to highlight because once we see that shift start to come back to services, that is an indication that the economy is sort of shifting back to normal. Typically, the U.S. is a very service-driven economy. So in 2021, keep an eye on news related to things, revolving around consumer spending. Once we start to see that shift back to people spending money on services, that is a sign that the economy is returning to normal, and that'll be a relatively good sign. One of the other shifts that we've seen this year is obviously the shift to remote work. And there's been a lot of ink spilled over the past year about the new world of work and whether or not remote work is here to stay. And that's all very difficult to predict. I think it's a pretty safe prediction to say that once we get to the other side of COVID-19, now that workers and employers have gotten a taste of what remote work is like, it's very likely that there will be more remote work than there was before. How much more, again, is very difficult to say. But it is worth pointing out that, remote work isn't for everybody. The Bureau of Labor Statistics estimates that only about 37% of jobs in the U.S. economy can be done fully remote. So there are large swaths of the economy that require people to be in person, physically at a location, or working with other people to do their job. So remote work obviously isn't for everyone, but even for the workers that are in jobs that could be done remotely, it's not so remote work isn't also for everyone in that sense as well. Some people have very difficult family situations, and they don't have a good space to work from home. People have different responsibilities at home. So there's a lot to consider when thinking about remote work is really for you, or whether or not that's something that you want to pursue. So it's going to be a factor in the labor market of the future, but how much is still very difficult to say. And then the last piece has to deal with sort of the landscape of the labor market, if you will. So obviously today's labor market looks very different than it did, this time last year. At the start of 2020, we were going on our 10th or 11th year of strong labor market growth. We had what was called a very tight labor market, where there was plenty of job opportunities out there and there weren't many workers to fill them. So those workers that were out there looking for work, there was plenty of opportunity. That situation is almost completely reversed with how many people are out there looking for work. Unemployment is falling, but it's still rather elevated. And so the labor market's not going to be as tight as it was in the years before the pandemic. So that means there are more unemployed people out there per job opening. And that also means there's less pressure on employers to invest in training or to hire from broader backgrounds. So what we typically see during periods of economic turmoil or higher unemployment is that inequalities between workers, whether that's inequalities over educational attainment, whether the racial or ethnic groups, men and women. Unfortunately, during an economic turmoil situation like we have now, those economic inequalities tend to widen. So, and this isn't very good news, right? Usually a tight labor market, a great economy is good for everyone because it lifts all boats. Unfortunately, we're in the opposite situation. So this is just one of those ways that, the onus is now sort of on the job seeker to improve their situation any way they can and try to fight those inequalities as we continue to go through this rough labor market. And so, for example, one of those ways is, in a tighter labor market, when employers were willing to train workers, now they're not as much. So that onus is going to fall on the job seeker to really upskill yourself and prepare yourself for today's labor market.
But the good news in all of this, and Daniel, thank you for all those insights. I know that it can be a lot to take in, but there are a lot of things that you can be doing as a job seeker to set yourself up for success. Even though the economy looks different now than it did even a couple of months ago, or especially a year ago, there are companies that are still hiring, and there are a lot of companies that are innovating right now to accommodate this new economic standard. So let me introduce to you a couple of ways that I think could really help you, some tips on what you can be doing to really elevate your own candidacy. The first, which I'm really excited to talk about, is a newer platform for us called Career Explorer. And this is a really good way for you to leverage Indeed to better understand the path that you do want to create for yourself. So if you happen to know of maybe an industry or a couple of keywords that you feel rightfully describe your professional identity or what you want to do, this is going to be a platform that's going to help you really kind of hone in on things like what types of job titles you should be searching for, salary information, additional trends and insights around, how the market has shifted. So, as this is a new platform for us, I would highly encourage you to check this out. It can be found at indeed.com/career. Looks and feels very similar to our marquee homepage. But I have found it to be really an exciting endeavor for us and really helpful for a lot of people that I've recommended it to. Something else that I want to encourage you to do is to update your resume on Indeed. So I don't know if you know this, but there are a lot, and by a lot, I mean a lot of employers who pay us back-end access to search for resumes proactively. So while you're out on Indeed and you are navigating your searches and identifying jobs that look interesting to you, if you have your resume uploaded to your profiles, recruiters might be able to find you first. They actually have a login where they can go in and input keywords that they're looking for in candidates, educational backgrounds, experiences, companies that they've previously worked at. So the more robust of a resume that you can have uploaded to your Indeed profile, the better off you'll be. Usually these are very ATS friendly. You can easily apply. So if you notice on some job search results on Indeed, it says apply with your phone or apply with Indeed resume. If you're someone like me, who doesn't want to have to go into a job application and recreate my entire resume manually, this is going to be a solution to that frustration. So getting that resume up there into your profile is going to allow you to tap an application directly from your phone, which I have found to be as a game changer. I want you to take advantage of timing as well. So January and February are historically very good months for job seekers because this is when budgets are recycling right into the next year for employers. Right, typically headcount is being approved and things like that. What I will say is that right now, just due to the demand with everything going on, you might experience a little bit of a delay. We were seeing that earlier in the month, but being that now we are almost mid-month in January, we are hoping that that loosens up a little bit. But even thinking about some of Brandy's resolutions, or getting that resume updated, getting that profile updated on your social media sites that you can use to connect with recruiters and companies, that's all going to just accelerate your overall candidacy if you are actively looking right now in your search. So definitely wanted to make you aware of that. And then, technology is great. So something that we've made available for you on Indeed is the ability to automate your search. So if you've gone into our platform and you've identified a vertical of roles that you really enjoy, or you've been able to filter down by companies who are hiring right now, maybe in your particular salary range, full-time, part-time, all of those parameters that you might include in a search filter, you can automate that search by simply checking a box within your search results, so that we can then do the heavy lifting on your behalf to then email you new jobs that have come about that meet your search criteria. So if you're looking for a partner in crime in that way, so that you don't have to go in and manually search every single day, we've made that available to you. This can be found even more directly at subscriptions.indeed.com. And then something else that we do feel is really important just to make sure that we cover for you is just to avoid job scams. I want you to know that we have a team at Indeed that is specifically responsible for making sure that the quality of content on our site continues to be elevated every single day. But this is something that as an aggregator, we are still working to have a handle on. So what I would suggest for you is, if you do come across something that feels too good to be true, it more than likely is. This could be, anytime an employer might ask you to write a check, if they want you to ship any sort of item ahead of time, obviously if it's any sort of money laundering request or anything to do with financials in that way, totally inappropriate for them to be there, that we will flag. And then any sort of fees. So if you are being asked to pay to apply to a job, that's not something that we will support. What we would ask you to do though is to flag those for us, and I'm going to show you how you can do that. But one of the best ways, or a couple of ways to really kind of avoid these scams, are to look for things like verified company email addresses. Anything that comes from someone personally would be something that I would flag as something that needs to be looked at in a greater capacity. If you do see any misspellings or any sort of weird grammar issues, that's typically indicative of a scam or an opportunity that's invalid. You want to make sure that you match the job offer to your application. At Indeed, we will always have one job posted per position. So, just make sure that is in alignment to make sure that you are avoiding a scam in that way. If you do have any sort of, apprehension towards the position, or if you do feel the need to validate anything, insist on an in-person or a video interview, whether that's, Zoom, FaceTime, whatever that might look like. If that would help you, validate the role, that's completely appropriate to do. Never send any form of payment ahead of time. I just mentioned this, but this is something that we are very strict about. And if you do happen to catch this, it is an invalidated role on our site. What I would also say too is that if you see any additional accounts that have been created or whatnot, like I said, it'll only be one specific job per posting on our site to keep it as clean as possible for you. So if you do discover that, definitely let us know. And then never accept money up front for work that you've not performed either. Which I think, depending on the circumstance, could sound enticing, but that is not indicative of a valid role on our site. And we just want to make sure that we are providing you the highest quality experience possible through not just using the site itself, but the actual jobs that are posted there. If you do see a scam, there's a way to let us know about this. You can either report a job directly from the posting. You can report a message directly from a recruiter if you feel that it's invalidated. And then you can always contact Indeed support. Our search quality team will look at this immediately for you because we, again, want to make sure that we're constantly innovating on your behalf, that we're increasing the quality of content on our site and making it as enjoyable an experience for you as possible. So in summation, let's just go over your new year, new job checklist. So just to review all the elements that we were talking about, be sure to take some time to explore career areas and determine which field would be a fit for you. Don't be afraid to look in industries that maybe you haven't worked in before. I'll share with you that I know of a very well-known tech company that they love candidates that come from healthcare backgrounds, because this particular tech company very much appreciates empathy as a part of their candidate profile, and they've found that empathetic individuals are commonly found within the healthcare space. So don't be afraid to kind of cross industry your searches, because you never know what types of skill sets that you have that a different type of organization or industry would be interested in. Update that resume so that your profile is up to snuff, and so that if you were to be found by a recruiter first, you feel as though your best foot is put forward and you are good to go in that way. Know that right now is one of the best times to be searching for a job. So, make sure that you go in, automate those job alerts for yourself so that as new jobs come into our site every single day, you're notified immediately, right? Be on the lookout for any sort of scam that is present. And if you feel that it's too good to be true, it just might be, let us know. We will investigate that for you. And finally, have some patience for yourself, have some grace. This is a wild time globally for everyone right now. It's been very stressful. I personally went into 2021 a mere, not even 2 weeks ago, wanting to have a fresh start, and already, right, we've been inundated with news and historical events taking place. Be kind to yourself and know that this is temporary. Okay, so what we would love to do is open up the rest of our time for Q&A. Answer any remaining questions that you have. Both Daniel and I will be available. I'll have Brandy moderate this for us, and we'll go ahead and get started.
Thanks, Taylor and Daniel. So now let's look at some of the top questions that came in. And I know we are at time. We're going to go over so that we can answer some of your questions. So stay on if you want to see those answers. The first one, top voted, is for those of us laid off later in our careers, what training or certification trends do you recommend to improve our competitiveness in an increasingly digital workplace? Taylor, any thoughts on that?
Yeah, that's a fantastic question. And whoever asked that, kudos to you for being aware of self-education. I think that that's so important. What I would recommend for you is if you do have maybe a specific role or a type of job that you are wanting to go for, I would look to see, what requirements or certifications in the job description are listed. And then, there are a lot of really wonderful, sites to self-educate. I can think of, LinkedIn Learning has a lot of really great courses there. I can think of an example. I just walked a friend of mine through this. He's very interested in getting involved in a customer success role. And a part of that is what we call client journey mapping. And there's an entire course available on LinkedIn Learning for that specific track. So, I would say, take it to Google and see what certifications might be available for that specific career track. And then you can go from there.
Thanks. And I'll also plug here that if you were recently laid off, we have a Jobcast Life After Layoff that goes through 10 steps that you should take to set yourself up for success going forward. And I will post that link in the chat. And then we have a related question here, maybe more for you, Daniel. What's the job market like right now for mature workers who aren't ready to retire?
That's a very good question. I know people reaching that, getting close to that retirement age and not being ready to retire is a pretty common theme. So, but, I think the job market for those people of those age group is very similar. It's all the same job market, right? So, the challenges that they're going to face broadly are very similar to the rest. So there's going to be industries that just don't have a lot of opportunity this year. There are some industries like things related to services that are going to have more opportunity as we begin to open up. And then, once we get post COVID-19, it'll be sort of an economic recovery all happen at the same time. I know some of the challenges specifically for those who have reached those older years and are looking to keep working. They have very specific challenges, just because of keeping pace with what's going on today. And for most of that, I would refer you back to Taylor's answer on his previous question and the importance of really highlighting those skills that you've gone out and gotten for yourself. Making sure you highlight those on your resume and making sure those skills are relevant for the type of roles that you want.
And something else that I will add in here that I think could also be very helpful. So regardless of your age, when you actually go to fill out your Indeed profile, you can take what's called an assessment. So it's a way for you to add in skills and experiences right to your profile so that you are presented in a much more robust way. But I also, just from a human perspective here, just want to call out, if you do identify as someone who is older and, has years of experience, from a previous organization, even if you've been in the same role for a long time, I never want you to feel as though that experience is invalid or discredited. Some of the most important people in my professional life, are from an older generation. I've learned so much from them, but we've kind of come to an understanding, right, that there are things that I've learned in my generation that I can pass along to them, and then vice versa. So by showcasing to a hiring manager or to a recruiter that you are open to, working collaboratively, cross-generationally, learning new things, that's gonna really elevate your candidacy if that's a particular challenge that you're facing.
Yeah, and I will add in there again, and I just posted the link in the chat, but we do have the Avoiding Ageism Jobcast where we address some of those challenges, some of those stereotypes about mature workers and how to counter them when you're searching for a job, through finding a company that will support you, as well as just setting yourself up for success in your resume, cover letter, to correctly express what you bring to the table with those years of experience. So I'll go to the next question here. Which industries are expected to experience the most growth in the new year? So I know we talked a decent amount about which industries were kind of hit harder. But Daniel, which industries do you think are on the up and up?
So I'll first say that that's largely, tied to the path of the virus. So let's assume we have some success with the vaccine rollouts and things really start to get moving again this year. Then the industries that are going to bounce back quickest are the ones that have the most ground to make up from the COVID-19 crisis. So again, anything related to services, certain pockets of retail that have been suffering, the restaurant industry, food service and prep. Those are the ones that are really going to bounce back strongly once we have a handle on COVID-19 and people are comfortable going back again. Travel and tourism, arts and entertainment, things related to crowds and events. Those are things that also have a lot of ground to make up, but those are going to be a little bit slower behind. Those are things that it's really going to require people to be very comfortable with resuming their previous life for those to really bounce back.
Thanks. A couple of more questions here. Will you address real versus fake jobs? And I know we had Taylor touch upon that with the job scams a little bit.
So here's what I will say. Know that every job on Indeed is intended to be an actual requisition. So things that you won't see, for example, are like multi-level marketing opportunities, right? We have cut those out actually a long time ago. So those won't exist on our site. An actual requisition does need to be tethered to the job posting. So no, for peace of mind in that sense, our technology is working for you in that way. But like I said, if you happen to see anything around, very odd compensation structures, asking for money ahead of time or paying you ahead of time, that would be indicative of a fake job. But like I said, we have so many invisible guardrails in place to make sure that those jobs that you do see in your search results are tethered to actual requisitions, that it's monitored very, very heavily. So I just want you to be confident in knowing that the jobs you do see on Indeed are real.
Thanks, Taylor. Yeah, and I'll just add in there that, unfortunately, there are people who are, taking advantage of the fact that there are so many people looking for work right now and, are pushing these scams. Not that, the scams existed before COVID-19, but we're definitely seeing more of them now, but we're also more on guard for them and just trying to make sure that, when it is a scam. We'll also, when Indeed, when someone reports a job or something like that to Indeed, and if you already applied to that job, we'll send you an email to let you know that that job that you applied for was flagged as a scam so that you're aware, and you're not waiting to hear back from this dream job that doesn't actually exist. So we will try and keep you updated on that. And then I think we have time for one more question. Do you think employers are more willing to embrace remote workers than before? I know that we saw the upward trend from the job seeker side of people looking for remote work. Do we think that the same trend is taking place on the employer side?
Real quickly, Taylor, I'll say that, this chart that I showed was all from the job seeker perspective. That was looking at job seekers' activity and their interest in remote work. When you look at the share of job postings that have remote work listed in the job posting, it's a very similar looking chart. There's a pretty big spike in mid-March, and that's something that's continued to grow even as we got through 2020. But Taylor probably has a bit of more real-world perspective.
Short answer is a confident yes. There are so many organizations now, and truthfully, there are still a lot of companies right now that are trying to figure out how to convert some of these roles into remote positions. And so I think that we're going to continue to see that. Transparently, I'll speak on behalf of just, even Indeed. Since our entire company has gone remote, I think that we've learned how to communicate more efficiently. We've even taken workplace surveys, and the majority of Indeedians have said, I actually prefer to work from home, a couple days a week or whatnot. So I think that we're going to find a nice balance of when offices do reopen, like some folks going back in, some having more flexibility. So I think that's the key, is you're going to see greater flexibility from employers around remote versus non-remote. If you think about director level and above who have historically been in an office at Monday through Friday directing teams, they've been gone for a year now. And of the directors that I know in this position, they actually like having more time with their families and cutting out commute times. And so I think that those little elements are going to continue to influence this sense of remote work way more than we had seen before.
Yeah, and I'll just remind everyone of that filter that Taylor showed earlier in the presentation, that you can see which jobs are remote, as well as which jobs have been set as temporarily remote. So pay attention to that as you're applying, as you're interviewing. If you do want to be permanently remote, you want to make sure and check with the employer whether you'll be expected to come into the office at any point once we've gotten past COVID. As you're searching, it's great that remote opportunities allow you to, connect with employers across the country or around the world even. But there may come a time later on where you'll have to, resume in-person activities to some degree. So make sure that that's part of your questions for the employer, maybe during your interview process. So with that, I think we are about at time. So if you found this Jobcast to be helpful, check out our others at go.indeed.com/jobcast. Thanks for watching. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and comment below.